This is the Heroic Voice, where I talk to comic book creators, people I've worked with, other interesting people about the history of comics, superheroes, and the current state of the comic book industry. I also discuss current and upcoming projects, current events, and any other topics my guests might be interested in talking about. So subscribe and hit the like button. Help me grow this channel and promote indie comic book creators, publishers, and other people affiliated with the comic book industry. Your comments are appreciated. Get to it and leave feedback, good, bad, and otherwise. I am your host, Dennis Mallonee, writer, publisher of the Heroic Multiverse, where we spotlight good girls, bad girls, super babes, and superheroics in a classic, kind of golden agey style. Grab some snacks and enjoy. This is the Heroic Voice. Hi, welcome to the Heroic Voice. Today is, what is today? Today is
August 3rd.
3rd, 2024. I'm with Henry Vogel, science fiction writer and creator of the legendary Southern Knights, the #1 super team of the South. Say hi, Henry.
Hello, everybody. I'm not sure about the legendary part, but I'm willing to defer to your judgment.
Okay, so it's been a while since we've spoken. It's good to see you. I mean, you look good. You look maybe better than I do. We're
Um,
about the same age, I think, right? I'm 69 now.
yeah, that gives you 2 years on me.
Oh,
So, yeah,
so
yes,
let's talk about the Southern Knights. It's been a while since they first appeared. That was back in 81,
two,
82.
right.
Yeah.
The very first issue, which was not called Southern Knights, we can go into that if anybody wants me to.
Yeah, that's an Archie Comics thing.
Yes, yes, it is. And I would be less upset if they had produced better comics, but actually, the Southern Knights is a vastly better title than the Crusaders, so I'm
Absolutely
not
it is.
upset
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah.
But yes, that came out in 1982.
Oh my goodness, how time flies. And it was a very different superhero team because there was in fact only one superhero on that superhero team.
True. I mean, they all had superpowers, but they weren't. Um, there was only one, and this was intentional, who was the prototypical science or comic book superhero that you would see in what is that called? Copper Age these days? The age?
Yeah, maybe it might be Bronze Age.
Bronze Age, that's it. Yeah. So, we had one who was your prototypical wear the uniform under the clothes, do the superhero thing. But I mean, we took it a bit farther and made him the big comic book fan who became a superhero because he wanted to, he was a big comic book fan. So
and that was Electrode, right?
Electrode, yes.
David, what was his last name?
Shank.
David Shank. All right.
Yes. David, after my partner, David Willis, who, the book wouldn't exist without because he was the money guy, such as it was. And Schenk, because that was one of the names of one of the authors of the calculus book that was laying on my desk next to me when I was trying to find a name.
Oh, that's wonderful. You also had a Swords Girl, don't
Yeah,
you?
Connie Ronan, who, yes, I added an extra N to the word Ronan to make Ronan. So, uh, but yes, technically she's got psychic abilities. They all just manifest through a sword. Um, so she can use sort of telekinesis because anything that she can block things with her sword and she can push things with her sword. Uh, but and I have to give credit to to my late wife Audrey, who came up with the phrase for it. It's a semi-physical manifestation of a psychic phenomenon. I think that's how Connie put it in the first book. It's been a while, but
It reminds me to some extent of Flair's explanation for her photonic abilities, the psychoactive organelles embedded in her skin.
yes, something like that. It sounded really good, and Connie Connie exists because shortly before I came up with Connie, the movie Heavy Metal debuted. And my favorite part of that movie was the Tarna the Terrakian um, episode of that. And I was thinking, a swordswoman. We should have a swordswoman. Comics are full of swordswomen, but they never use their swords.
Yes.
Valkyrie in The Defender, or even the Black Knight in whatever he was guest starring in at the time. They would always whack people with the flat of their blade. I was like, why do you have a sword?
Yeah. Why not just
Uh,
a war mallet?
yeah, it makes no sense. And I did when I brought that up to Dave Kraft, Dak, he actually said had he stuck with the Defenders, he was going to shift the Valkyrie to a quarterstaff for exactly that reason.
Hmm.
But what I wanted was a swordswoman who could use her sword and hack and slash people, but not fill the book with blood and guts.
Hence the
Thus,
the psychic ability.
yes, the psychic ability, which, mimics the wound that somebody might receive, but all it does is the arm stops working if it would have been cut off by a real sword, and then it that effect fades away after an hour or so. So
Clever.
we got all the advantages of Red Sonja without the blood and guts that would go with it.
Hmm. Then you had the Clemson girl,
Yeah,
Kristen.
Kristen Austin. I'm not sure why I gave her the last name of Austin, but Kristen was a name I always just liked, so that's why I picked that one. Um, she was the last character of the original four that were created, and it was literally because I thought the team needed at least four people. You rarely had a superhero trio group. And the one thing the Southern Knights were missing was the prototypical strongman.
Uh-huh.
Basically, I thought we'd do a strongman, except instead of doing like Thor, who's big and strong, or Hercules in the Marvel books, who was big and strong, or Power Man, who was big and strong, we'd get this little girl, 5'2", petite girl, and make her the strong one. And she ended up, when Butch Geist drew the initial version of the Southern Knights, which, by the way, we ended up using as the cover for Southern Knights #2. So this was the very first drawing of the Southern Knights. And Butch Geist lived in Asheville, which was about an hour and a half from Clemson, which is where David Willis and I were both attending the university at the time. And so he just drew her in a Clemson shirt. Clemson had just won their first national football title, so they had attracted a fair bit of attention, and Butch drew that, and we said, all right, she went to Clemson, then we'll just write that into the book.
That is so cool. I remember in that first issue, Kristen did not know that she was bulletproof.
Right. And that made there's I ran into somebody who was like, how could she not know if she's bulletproof or not? And I was like, well, are you bulletproof? He's like, no. Have you ever been shot? No. How do you know? So nobody had ever shot her. So she had no idea whether she was bulletproof or not. Unlike, if you look at some of the early Superman stories, they try to give the doctors try to give Superman a shot and it breaks the needle and they break scissors trying to cut his hair. I was thinking, how do you keep that kind of stuff quiet? But apparently, small town Depression era Kansas towns. But I came up with a rationale for how Kristen's somewhat impervious skin worked. And I didn't have to work real hard on it because Frank Herbert beat me to it. If you remember the way the shields work in the book Dune, they never really went into the details in the recent movie. But the reason that they used swords in this super advanced society was they had shields that would block most of basically anything hitting the shield very hard
High
would be
energy.
reflected. And to win a duel with a knife or a sword, you had to be quick until you came in contact with the shield, and then you had to slow down to go through the shield. So that's more or less what I said. If you come at Kristen very slowly, if you have her completely under your power and she can't stop or move or anything like that, you could come up and very slowly stab her and kill her.
Did you
But
ever have occasion to show that she was not in fact impervious? I don't remember.
no, we never did. I just had that ready in case it ever came up.
Oh, I see.
It's always good to know how things work.
And then we skipped over Mark.
We did skip over Mark slash Dragon. His brilliantly, nobody was fooled by the last name, Mark Dagan, the guy who turns into a dragon. Yes, look, I pulled an R out of Dragon to come up with his last name. Um, that one actually came about. You'll like this story. He was the second character, and I was just sitting around in sort of fall of 82
Mhm.
with the first edition of the Champions role-playing game.
Really?
Yes.
That
And
is so cool.
I was rolling up powers for a character and did a little bit of randomization, and I came up with a hero who would be able to turn into a creature. And like, well, what kind of creature would he turn into? I thought, well, my then new wife, because we'd been married about less than a year, I think, at that point, um, loved unicorns, but I was more of a dragon guy. So I decided dragon. But why should he be a person who turns into a dragon when he could be much cooler as a dragon who turns into a person?
I have never heard this story before. Why have you not told me this story?
I just, I don't even know that I've mentioned that in any of my tellings, because most of the people that would have at the time that it was coming out, role playing was a much smaller thing. And I don't recall that you had the champions going at any point when I was relating it.
Oh, that was later. The champions, we didn't come to the agreement until 85, I think. And the first book came out in 86. Right. So that was a few years after, you did the Southern Knights.
Yeah. So I I think it was probably a situation where literally having you as the interviewer is what reminded me that that was a part of the story I had actually never related.
Well, it's interesting too, because we're coming full circle on that. You see that poster behind me. That is in fact for the cover of the upcoming um, League of Champions, role-playing source book, right? Using sixth edition Champions rules that we're publishing in conjunction with Tiger Paw Press. So, it's maybe once you get the Southern Knights up and going again, we could do something along those lines with them. I'm
Yeah.
just tossing that out there. Yeah. But there was, okay, that's the four original members. And then there was that other guy.
Aramis. Well,
Yes,
actually, it depends on which other guy you want to talk about. There was also Brian, the groundskeeper, who was a part-time hero.
really.
Uh,
I never
you're
paid much attention to him. Tell me about him before we get to Aramis then.
okay. So we introduced Brian as, I guess you could call him our version of Jeeves from the Avengers.
Jarvis.
Jarvis. Jeeves is Bertie Wooster. Yeah. So Wooster and Jeeves. Sorry, Jarvis. Um, so he was sort of kind of our answer to Jarvis, except he wasn't a proper butler. He was just basically we said he came with the house, that it was the original owners of the house had hired his ancestors to be the groundskeepers, and as long as they wanted it, then whoever owned the house had to employ a member of that family as the groundskeeper.
Oh, it's like the Tinkerbell family at Disneyland.
I guess. I admit
It,
I'm
it's the
way
same
down
similar
on my.
situation, right? There was a family of stunt people, and they entered an agreement with Walt, right? That the girl from that family would be Tinkerbell, yeah, at Disneyland. I don't know if that agreement is still in effect, but it was in effect for a very long time.
I
And
was totally unaware of that.
yeah,
So that's how we wrote it in. He was introduced in issue 3, I think. No, issue probably issue 2. That's when they moved into the Hampton house, which is
mhm.
what we named the house. Um, so yeah, I really should have reread all my books instead of trying to remember stuff that happened 40 years ago.
That's cool.
Um, And at the time that we were originally planning this, and it still exists, but there was a huge rivalry between Clemson and Georgia. So since they were in Georgia, um, we made him a University of Georgia graduate. And the artists that we had working on the book when we introduced that were like, oh God, are we going to be doing? It was like, no, it's just sort of a background thing. We hardly used it, but we tossed it in there just for fun. Um, but his primary thing was he was the groundskeeper, but in one of the later issues, we've got these suits of armor that David Schenck has designed because, of course, he's the genius of the group, and he they ended up having to fight a villain in one of the suits of armor. So David keeps the suit of armor, and Brian's out trying to do stuff like pull a tree stump out of the ground, and he's having a real hell of a time. You see him straining on the pulley and everything, and he's like, "Wait a minute, I'm going about this way wrong." So he walked into David's workshop, put on the armor, went out, yanks the tree stump out, no problem. Everything's going great. Then he hears that the Southern Knights are having difficulty downtown with a battle that they've gone off to. And so
Got to help
he
out.
he flies out to help out in the fight. Now, I think this was fairly late in, this was a good ways in. This might have been issue 14 or 15.
It's not something that's
I
stuck
think.
in my mind.
Right. It was the second appearance of Dread.
Dread. Okay,
And
Dread, issue 14.
there you go, issue 14. So the second appearance of Dread and the
Oh,
suit of armor that's on the front there.
there it is. Yeah, there's that suit of armor right there. There
Yes.
it is.
I can't quite see it. There you go. So that suit of armor is what Brian puts on, and flies to the Southern Knights' aid. And what we ended up doing is David's like, well, that's really great. You could join the team. And Brian's like, nah,
Nah.
no, not really my thing. I'm glad I was able to help. If you really, really need help sometime in the future, maybe I'll put it back on again. But, you know, um, I like taking care of the grounds. So he was
That's his
the
thing.
yes. So
It,
he's the part-time hero. The the other hero was Aramis Marrow, who David Willis came up with a lot of this. He was introduced in the fifth issue of the book, which coincides with the first issue drawn by Chuck Wojtkiewicz. And
Here's the Southern Knights with Aramis.
right, he's the one with the glowing hands. Yep. Um, so he was a mage. He had the abilities of magic, and had been shoved for his safety into a magical chamber of that put him into magical suspended animation for 200 and some odd years.
He was also a kid.
He was a kid. Yeah, he was like 16. Um, so he's first and foremost, he is a wonderful, wonderful reminder to me that if you're going to have magic, come up with your rules first, because I did not. And there are a couple of times where basically I needed he became the magical silver bullet that we defined. Here's how magic works today.
You
Because I had
cheated. You cheated.
I did cheat. I
I had
did
to deal
cheat.
with that same issue, well, with the Black Enchantress and with Lady Arcane, right? And I did not make that same mistake. I actually know how their powers work. So
Yes. See, I worked out how Kristen's powers worked, how Connie's powers worked, but I did not set up rules for that. So first of all, anybody listening to this, if you're going to put magic into anything, then make sure you know how the stuff works beforehand. This is why I write science fiction books these days, not fantasy books, because I have yet to define magic in a way that I'm happy with and could use to write with. However, I did start a prose Southern Night story a few years ago, and I came up with a definition for how Aramis's abilities would work that I was happy with, but I don't know how well it would actually work in comic book, because it was kind of visual, but only from Aramis's point of view,
hmm.
and that would be threads of magical energy that would be tied to different things. To a certain extent, air, earth, fire, water.
Right, that's exactly the same solution that I came up with for the Black Enchantress for Andrea. She's basically an elemental sorceress who can, if she spends time on it, come up with specific enchantments, that involve matter manipulation and stuff like that. Uh,
I was coming up with that, and if we ever get new Southern Night stories, I will work with something like that if I can come up with a way to make it visually work.
Use
Because there were
threads.
well, that's it. That it is threads.
Yeah.
That the threads that are there, and the fact that um, things that have no life in them, like a road. Specifically, there is a point where in the story I was writing, Aramis needs to shield people from some damaging, like I think it was a machine gun, but he had to literally rip some life from himself and feed it into the road to merge it into the threads the dead threads of the road to give sufficient life for his magic to work.
That seems risky.
Well, yes, it does hurt.
Yeah.
That's why you don't do that very often. From a role-playing game point of view, it would be like, well, I really need to pull this off, so I'm going to take points of damage to myself to give myself the extra power I need to power this spell.
It's a power stunt. Yeah.
It is basically a power stunt. The idea would be that most things have some kind of associated life in them, but dead pavement is dead pavement. You need to get some kind of life in there, and the only maybe if you have a lot of time, you can move some in from the grass or the weeds, but when you really need to pop up a shield real fast, there's only one place you can get it quick enough.
Yeah. A few years ago, you and I contemplated a Southern Knights revival. You actually wrote an introductory story for that. Um, I should have looked at that before I came online. I still have it on my desktop computer.
Well, that is actually the story that I was initially converting into prose, and it is there was a big battle to open the thing, to reintroduce everybody to the knights. They were battling against, for want of another term, this is a trademark term, folks, but that's okay. I'm not trying to trade under it. They were battling against a couple of battle mechs, for want of another term. And this is the battle that I was recreating when Aramis would use his magic to shield people. So I was coming up with a way to describe that. And when a battle mech turns its machine guns on nearby stranded traffic, Aramis lifts up part of I-85, which I don't drive down that way to Atlanta that often because I live in Raleigh nowadays. So it wouldn't bother me as much if suddenly the there's road repairs that are required.
So let's talk about your science fiction projects. Where would people find that? And
Amazon.
yeah, we try to keep this under half an hour, so let's do this quickly. Time flies when we're having fun, and this is fun so far. It really is.
Yes. Amazon. Every one of my books is available on Amazon. If you go to Amazon and search for Henry Vogel, then you will get a return on most of my books, and quite a few of the comic books for that matter, because people are up there trying to sell the comic books. They also have the X-Thieves omnibus that was recently released by Critical Blast Publishing. And the science fiction books you'll find I like to say that I am Golden Age science fiction, digital age author. So I am writing the kind of stories I grew up reading. I've got space opera, sword and planet stories, all that sort of stuff. And I even have a recent series that so far only has 2 books in it that is set in a very solidly 1940s kind of pulp science fiction solar system where Mars has a breathable atmosphere, Venus does, Mercury does. Most of them have some kind of sentient life on them, but the primary people we're following are humans because they've kind of spread out over at least the inner solar system. That would be inside the asteroid belt is how I'm sort of defining that. But I have my Sword and Planet series is like 8 books so far. Each one stands on its own. You have a guy who crash lands on a long lost human colony that has swords, crossbows, and lighter than air airships, because airships are cool, and that is
Seems familiar somehow.
is it?
Hmm.
What
It seems familiar.
well, yeah. Um, but it's actually a lower tech society than the Martian Society in Edgar Rice Burroughs' Mars series.
Which is public domain now.
It is, at least some of it is,
Yeah.
but It's 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 my high action fun series that I write. And I know we're running really close to
Well,
time.
let's make sure, because you mentioned the X-Thieves Omnibus in passing. That includes all 13 issues of the
It
series in
does.
one volume.
One volume, 340 pages long. It is brand new, literally just released in the last couple of weeks. So new that my copies haven't even shown up yet. I'm hoping to see it in the very near future.
And you mentioned before we came online that you're planning to do much the same thing with the Southern Knights.
Yes, we are working out some details for that. We have hopes of publishing some of the issues, but only some probably because of the cost in color. And then considering the number of issues there are in the Southern Knights, that would probably be, I'm thinking,
34 issues plus that 4-issue Dragon miniseries.
right, we're
And then
probably
the
looking at,
and then the 2 issues that we did with the champions as the crossover. So there were
right, but
36 Southern Knights issues altogether.
they don't, those two don't stand on their own very
They do
well.
not.
They would be, they would be fine to regather into a crossover individual volume.
Which we should do. We should do that.
Yeah,
Jointly publish it. Yeah.
particularly in this day and age of print on demand where you don't have to go spend a fortune to print the books. Uh,
And those do have color. I made sure to insert color into those books before I reprinted them in a later version. So, we wouldn't have much work to do if we did collect those 6 issues, I believe, into a single volume.
I think it was eight.
But we split a couple of stories up between, so it ends up being the equivalent of about 6 full issues.
Okay.
And I don't know how many pages exactly off the top of my head, but
Well, it's 6 issues, probably something well less than 150.
140, 150 pages maybe.
Yeah, something like that, I would think.
All right.
So, uh,
And you do have future plans for the Southern Knights that people should look forward to, even though they're not ready to go yet. Yeah.
I would love to do some more Southern Nights, but the the lack of access to artists and funds to pay artists is why I was looking at doing Southern Nights prose stories. So, and I've not yet entirely given up on that idea. If I do that, I was going to call them. I was going to sort of release them as the equivalent of the prose equivalent of one issue of a comic book every month and sell them fairly cheaply, then later gathered into a single omnibus under the title Artless Comics.
Ah, I love it. Okay.
Yes,
Now, if people want to follow you, Facebook, uh,
I
Instagram,
am. I am on Facebook. Um, Henry Vogel is my personal account. Henry Vogel author is my authorial account. They are linked together. So if you follow Henry Vogel author, then you'll pick up on anything that I post over on the author side of things. You can try to hit me up on the personal one, which is Henry Vogel, but try to give me some reason why I know you. I have a lot of people show up out of nowhere, and there's absolute anybody who's been on social media knows that you'll get these people who have no friends, no connections, no nothing, and you're just, why are you trying to friend me? Because I'm not stupid enough to fall for your OnlyFans page or send you my bank account or anything like that. Uh, if you go over to X, or as it was formerly known, Twitter, I am Henry Vogel 9. I was at one point Henry Vogel, but I let that one go and deleted
oh,
it.
Henry.
So, well, I wasn't using Twitter at the time, although now I've found that Twitter actually provides better, I get better interaction than I do on Facebook.
I find that to be somewhat true. Heroic Publishing has, you know, social media accounts all over the place, but the ones that we get the most traction with are in fact Twitter and Facebook. And it's not surprising. So yeah. So okay, let's wrap this up then. Thank you for being here. People, hit the like and subscribe buttons. Follow Henry. Keep abreast of what he's doing, especially his science fiction work. And keep your fingers crossed that we can actually get the Southern Knights back these days. I love that team.
As an absolute minimum, there'll be reprints, but sure would love some new stuff. I'm just not sure what form it will take place, or how it will happen. Certainly support from everybody that's involved in it. So,
You
and
should consider, just as an aside, creating a Kickstarter account. I've had some pretty good success with that. People I've spoken to have had some great success with that.
hmm,
You could get enough financing.
it has crossed my mind, but I wouldn't want to try to do a Kickstarter without a nearly finished product.
Yeah, that is
And
unfortunately my experience as well. I've learned my lesson in that regard. All righty. Again, thank you, Henry. We're going to sign off.
okay,
Um,
thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
we should do it again sometime when you have more news. So
Okay.
closing down.
All right. Bye, everybody.